Hi, I'm Joe Ward for Boxer Shorts Media, and I want to talk about taxi cab rate increases in the Cape Breton Regional Municipality. There's some confusion about what's going on. So wait, for just a minute, calm your jets. Let's clear something up right out of the gate. I support rate increases that are fair to the drivers, and I say that knowing that some of the passengers are going to struggle with the new rates. There's no division here. Cab drivers need to earn an income, and low-income riders need to be considered. We're in the CBRM, so struggling to get by isn't exactly a new topic. So what's the confusion? I'll explain. Some taxi customers in Sydney are being surprised to discover that they're being charged more right now. If you're following the news, the reason they're being charged more is not, and I repeat this, is not because the CBRM has changed the bylaw and increased the rates yet. Less than 48 hours ago, Council decided all willy-nilly to recommend a 30% increase, but that process requires that a public hearing be called so that everyone has a chance to weigh in on the proposed change. So why are cab customers in Sydney seeing some fare increases right now? The answer seems to be that some Sydney cab drivers are now turning on their meters. You see, Sydney is different than other cab zones. The bylaw requires that they run a meter. Each customer is charged $4 plus $1.15 per kilometer of travel. If the cabs are required by the CBRM bylaw to charge customers based on their meter, then what does it mean when they are starting to turn on their meters this week? So listen, don't take my word for it. There's a memo issued by one of the local cab owners in Sydney. It suggests that there are new CBRM taxi bylaw rules saying they are mandated to use taxi meters for pricing. Let's bring it up on the screen in case you haven't seen it, so here you go. Taxi cabs in Sydney were always required to use the meter. As many frequent riders will tell you, they just charge flat rates instead. The irony here is that by charging flat rates on most of their customer rides, they'll be charging less money for the call. And I'd like to hear the explanation for why they decided to do it that way in the first place. I emailed a company owner to ask about the discrepancy between the memo they wrote and the CBRM bylaw. In the response from the owner, she told me that they were required to use meters all along, but they have always flat rated the majority of their calls. So why start using the meter now? She expressed in the email the following, and I'm going to quote this directly. So start quote. Recently, we were informed by the Taxi Bylaw Enforcement Office that if we were caught with a passenger in the car without the meter running, the driver and the company would both be fined. It's not new, it's just being enforced, end quote. I replied to ask who the Taxi Bylaw Enforcement Officer was that conveyed that information, and it's been radio silence ever since. Just for the record, I sent a copy of this email to Councillor Perush, so he has the info, and my expectation is that he'll be following up on this, because this was not the information that was conveyed while the CBRM Planning Department representative made his proposal to the CBRM Council to increase the rates. Here's a question. Does the CBRM pay any attention to taxis whatsoever? When the planner told Council that there have been no bylaw rate increases for cab drivers for 14 years, a decade and a half, folks, that's not very strong indication that anyone is paying attention. All hell would break loose if CBRM mayor and council members didn't get a prescribed raise each year. Do you remember the last time there was a lot of hoopla when they all decided it was best to have a private meeting to give themselves a raise? I'm going to be specific since I know one or two of them may see the video and they're going to argue that I've been inaccurate on this point. They used that private meeting to discuss increasing their salary to offset Revenue Canada for a change that stopped sheltering a portion of their salary from tax. So that's out of the way. If I'm in favor of increasing cab rates to fairly compensate drivers, what's this all about? For starters, if there are bylaw rules the CBRM has no intention of enforcing and cab companies don't like, I'll give you the cheat sheet notes on what you're supposed to do. Change the bylaw rule or remove it. See how easy that was? No charge for the consulting. Secondly, regardless of whether the CBRM kept taxi driver compensation frozen in time for over a decade, there is still going to be an impact on low-income riders that need taxi cabs frequently. There's an almost entirely unavoidable consequence of a long overdue change in the rates. But these frequent cab customers don't need to be subjected to confusion because Sydney taxis have suddenly started following the bylaw and running their meters, which results in a jump in rates ahead of the proposed 30% increase that the CBRM will almost certainly follow through with in a few weeks' time. If they read the news over the last 2 days, they would understand that the increase is going to occur in the very near future, not that they would be paying more already. The metered rates aren't necessarily unfair, by the way. They're exactly the rates that the CBRM bylaw has prescribed. It's what customers are supposed to be charged. But if they've been getting flat rates that are lower than the metered rates for years, it doesn't matter how you define it. They're already seeing a price increase for the very same cab rides they were taking a week prior. Before I finish up today, I want to make one last point of clarification that the CBRM planners and council should pay attention to. Here's the thing. If the CBRM approves a 30% increase in cab fares, all zones outside of the Sydney zone are going to potentially be getting less of an income increase. And hang in there with me for a second. I'm going to do some quick math, and I know from discussing COVID-19 hospitalization rates, the topics that include math often don't go over very well at all. I'm looking at this rate schedule that's published with the bylaw. Let's bring it up on screen. Flat rates for all zones outside of Sydney are $7. So let's compare a short 5-kilometer ride. In any of these zones, that ride is $7, a flat rate. After a 30% increase, that ride will be a $9.10 flat rate. So now let's look at Sydney. I'm going to estimate the numbers here a little bit based on a family member who was surprised by the change recently. On any given day, that person might pay $8 for a 4.6 kilometer ride. Yesterday, she was charged about $10, which is a little higher than I'd calculate if I was doing the calculations based on the metered rate. So a $2 increase on a formerly $8 ride is a 25% increase. Now, what's this ride going to cost when the new 30% rate increase is applied to both the base cost of $4 and the per kilometer rate of $1.15 in Sydney? So I already used my calculator, and I hope that this isn't wrong, but it comes out to $12.08. If the ride is normally charged $8, if drivers ignore the bylaw metering requirement, then it's up about 51%. So why would drivers in Sydney get an increase in fares of around 50% and drivers in all other zones be limited to only 30% on their flat rates? If the goal is to make sure drivers are compensated fairly, I don't think the effective increase in fees they charge should be more in Sydney than the other zones. And if you listened to the council session on this a few nights ago, more than once it was mentioned by council members directly to the presenting planner representative that taxi companies in other zones told them they needed rate increases that were higher than 30%. Adding $2 or $3 to a flat rate of $7 is between 28 and 43%. So they're going to get the bottom end of that rate, but they won't be getting the effective increase that the Sydney cabs will have if they turn their meters on. So what is my call to action here? CBRM Mayor and Council need to get in touch with the Planning Department and find out about the history of the Sydney Zone drivers going with a flat rate instead of the prescribed metering, and why that has seemingly been okay with the bylaw officers up until now. And then they need to figure out why they'd be willing to move forward with an increase that will likely benefit one zone in Sydney more than all of the rest. And maybe, just maybe, they should find out who the bylaw enforcement officer is that the Sydney cab owner claims only recently warned them that they must comply with the bylaw metering or face fines. Yes, drivers need to be paid fairly. Yes, drivers need to have these rate increase with inflation and other costs like surges in gasoline pricing like we're seeing now. And yes, there will be some significant financial difficulty imposed on lower income passengers when the CBRM tries to impose 14 years of complete inattention to the rates in just 1 month. If a bylaw doesn't mean anything and nobody pays attention to it, just tear it up and be done with it. But don't leave drivers struggle to get by after more than a decade of zero consideration for their income. And council, do your homework. Make sure you get the full story, not just bit by bit in a Q&A session with a planning department rep when it's pushing midnight and half of you are wishing you were already in bed asleep. CBRM planning. If you're going to set the regulations, start enforcing them or change them to be compliant with what is actually happening. And when you present to mayor and council, make sure you give them the full story. And after 14 years without a rate increase, suggesting 20% is the magic number without any analysis presented really doesn't seem to fit with the idea of planning. Not very much at all. It all seemed very ad hoc to me.
Please hang up and try again.